we're talking about the Corporate Transparency Act, which will impact most, at least I know it will impact most of you. And I'm not sure if all of you have a business, but there are new compliance obligations. They're not crazy hard to comply with in most situations. But I believe there's a lot of implications with that. Are you unmuted on your teams? Ryan says he can. Let's see. We're checking. We have people online. So let me just check. Oh. Johnny, can you hear us? Johnny can hear. Ryan, you can't hear me? And I think the microphone's working on my end. Okay. So, um, so yeah, just come on in, get food. If you don't have food, Salem has something.
It's recorded.
This is recorded. Yeah, so you guys know that. We do record it. There's people that miss it, can't make it. So with this, the goal is to talk about the actual act and compliance, as well as some of the deeper issues that I see associated with it. Some of the concerns that I have and that I want to pass along and share as we talk about these things. So I will be presenting some info, but we do want to have discussion. We want people to share thoughts and views. I don't personally believe we should ever talk about the law without sharing our viewpoints on it, because there's a lot of things to know, a lot of principles to look at, a lot of things to talk about. So feel free to jump in if you're online. Feel free just to shout out. I can't see the screen online for those that are there, but Matt will be monitoring that as well. But you can just jump into the conversation. And I guess just real quick, since there's not a ton of us, what if we do some quick introductions before we get started? Let me know who each other is. I'm Austin, and I work in Believe, something that I've been working on. The goal of Believe is to get good people to do good things that are bigger than what we usually focus on. We want to solve problems in society. And so we aim to talk about those, work on those, and provide resources with those. And then invite others to do the same. So one other thing to note too, we do have children here. We love kids. They're always welcome at meetings. And so feel free to bring your kids at any time. And if you do come to a Believe meeting, just enjoy the sound of children because we need them in our work. Sorry. Yeah. Well, but mine will be making some noise too. Good baby here. So Camden, my name is
If he gets on Monday. My name's Camden. I've been friends with Austin for he's like known to probably. I'm very deeply involved in e-commerce. Entrepreneur, dad. And yeah, I don't know what else you want to say. It's my name. What I do.
um
American
that's great.
Yeah.
Anything you want people to know about him?
Fulfillment center that we're starting out finally to shipping and receiving. I own a marketing agency for Amazon Channel. Like the product companies. So like I said, anything e-commerce related, that's definitely us. And I do a lot of sourcing too. So I want to of those things for sure. Your products.
Awesome.
Cool.
Kristen.
I'm Kristen from Campfly. We help run the business together, so we're wanting to learn more. So
She's very involved in her work.
oh yeah.
She's very involved in her work.
Yeah. That's all.
Awesome. Josh.
Josh Sternville, Wasatch Tax Advisor, and I've had a good professional relationship for 45 years now.
Almost 7.
Yeah,
So
it's been a while.
that's been a while.
Yeah.
Awesome. Jaleesa?
Yeah. I'm Julie Fidel and I do work from immigration, right?
And we love Brain Integration, by the way. So if they ever need, we'll give a recommendation for it. Sarah.
I am Sarah McCandless. I own a plumbing and heating business in Park City, and I'm also a soap business in Salt Lake. I met Austin through homeschool, a lot of stuff.
Awesome.
Jill,
Okay, I didn't know I had to have a 30-minute or a 30-second.
you can do 10 seconds if you want.
Okay, hi, I'm Jill Peterson, I'm a real estate agent, I live in the West Jordan area. I am trying to, proactive in what's going on starting today, so.
Awesome. Very awesome. Nate,
The main Jupiter, it's not like branding, I'll have to stand up. But we own a, we own a ABA company, so we help kids with autism with doing behavioral health. We met Austin through legal stuff. Apparently people don't like you to get into that industry. But Austin has helped us a lot through that. We have a child with autism. That's what brought us into that industry. But we love it and love working with Austin. Anything he has, we love to hear about. So
awesome. Thank you. You say anything, Brandy? No. Okay. Phelan,
And Phelan, that's where it's been. I just kind of tag along with Austin places since I'm married to them, so.
Tara,
I'm Tara. I work with Austin, in learning and grateful for the opportunity to keep learning and growing.
Christian,
I'm Christian. I have several different companies. I've been Austin for one of my business partners. I have a team overseas and I run out of the Philippines. I do a lot of stuff in China, Taiwan, do e-commerce stuff as well. So I know companies around this. What?
and Christian does speak Chinese. So, Kirk,
Kirk Huffaker, I run a small historic preservation consulting business. Same historic buildings in Utah right now. And I'm also on the board of a couple nonprofits. These nonprofits would be one of them. Happy to come here.
yeah, and he's on the board of a nonprofit that one of my neighbors, old neighbors, helped start. So, it's kind of fun. I always like knowing people that start nonprofits. So, Chelsea, what about you?
My name's Chelsea and I work, I'm working on a renewable energy project that converts waste into electricity and clean water. And, we heard about this through them, I'm married to Matt. But, I feel like this is super relevant and important that we figure this out, so.
Awesome. Brielle,
I'm Brielle Pepworth,
who are you related to?
my dad.
Make or claim me. And Matt.
I'm Matt Hepworth, marketing, creative side and tech right now for Believe. So
I'll give a shout out to Matt. He designed this. So if you like this design, that was Matt. I like it personally. So where? Thanks. I have a couple people online. I don't know who else online. You want to introduce yourself, Johnny?
you're muted, Johnny. Maybe Tommy's muted.
Johnny, you're muted. It looks like.
Still muted.
Maybe not.
Is your sound on?
Should be. Maybe our online sound's not working. Maybe we'll have to do chat.
Yeah, we're not able to hear you, Johnny.
Let's test Ryan. Ryan, you there?
He
Does
says,
that work?
he says, Ryan Peck, father of 5.
So Ryan's on. He's father of 5. Johnny is president of. What does that say?
5E.
5E. So
That's funny because Kyle says that you can hear Johnny. So
wow.
some people can hear him. Some can't.
So yeah, computers. We're still trying to figure out everything, how it all works. But thanks for that.
Kyle's on here too.
And Kyle's on. So Kyle's typing something there. Says hi. Yeah, so welcome those online. We appreciate you guys joining. So to jump into this, let me come back here. So the Corporate Transparency Act, I want to give you why the government said it's necessary and what they're trying to accomplish. And we'll use their own words. There's been a lawsuit has been filed over it. And they filed a lot of evidence justifying it. And we'll go through some other evidence. But there's a lot of illegal money that moves between countries in the US, outside the US. And if you have drug money, for example, with cash, you need to get a place you can use it. You try and find a business where you can run it through, clean it up, and make it look like legitimate money. And companies and gangs and others have gotten really good at this. So they can move lots of money, and the government hasn't been able to stop it yet. So they say, what are our problems with figuring this out? And what they're claiming right now is that because states allow companies to be created without disclosing ownership, that makes it so that they can't track and stop this illegal activity. So these are a lot of their words. You can read them on the screen. But they say straight up, this lack of transparency is considered by law enforcement, financial institutions, and anti-corruption organizations to be a primary obstacle to tackling financial crime in the modern era. So just with that statement alone, do any of you, what do you think of that lack of transparency, making it hard for the government to find the bad guys? Do you think that's the truth of it, right? But is it something in general? Do you support more transparency, meaning the government can see more of what you're doing in your individual life? Or do you think there's reasons there has been no transparency for a while?
I think there's reasons for no transparency. Well, it's funny, in my opinion, is the people that are wanting it are the ones that are corrupt, wanting transparency of people. My opinion.
Okay. So you don't trust those in power. You're saying you want us to be transparent, but we're not doing this.
Exemption licensing, exact location of that.
Yeah, so there are some exemptions we'll get to where things are exempt from this. And insurance companies, securities, a bunch of things are exempt. Even large companies are exempt. Because apparently, according to Congress, we're the problem as the small business owners. We're the ones funneling the money through. But they say straight up, this lack of transparency. So again, I say, well, it's true that your job's harder if there's no transparency. But I am concerned personally about the government just saying, well, you need to make our job easier. So we want it more transparent.
Kyle asked, why does knowing ownership help them stop criminal money transfers?
Okay, it's a great question. So what happens right now when they don't know ownership, it's not so much that they're looking to stop it when it's happening. They're trying to track down who's doing it so they can arrest them and put them in jail. And they can't find the people without knowing who owns the business. And guess how many of these people are filing tax returns? Probably not a lot of them, right? And so the government doesn't have these tools to say, who is it that's doing this? And so the place they've targeted is ownership of business, ownership and those that control a business. And they believe that if they can know who that is, they'll be able to track down and stop these groups from doing what they're doing. Again, I'm not here arguing for that, just explaining what they believe.
Kyle says, seems like they could follow the money and then just issue subpoenas, assuming they have due cause.
Yeah, and that's so follow the money. What happens is, at least what the government claims, is once money transfers overseas, it gets harder to follow with different companies involved. And they have digital wallets where things can virtually disappear and you can't trace almost anything. People can distribute quite a bit of money through digital wallets. And then they talk about these layers. They create super complex layers of structures. They say much like Russian nesting. And I know how to say that word, dolls. And they do it across various secretive jurisdictions. So there's some countries that don't work with other countries. So if you want to go to Cayman Islands, for example, you can move some money there. It's a lot more secretive, and they lose track of what's happening and where things go. So, in other words, criminals have gotten complex. They're good at what they do. And this one makes me laugh. For more than 2 decades, only 2 decades, guys, the US government has documented the use of legal entities by criminal actors to purchase real estate, conduct wire transfers, burnish the appearance of legitimacy when dealing with counterparties, and control legitimate businesses for ultimately illicit ends. Do you think this only started 2 decades ago? No. I mean, even you go back to, what was it, Al Capone or something? He was, but apparently we've only been documenting it for 2 decades. So again, it raises the question, sure, I'm sure someone has used a company to do something illegal. Why does that mean I have to now be involved in things? Why does that mean that the government has to have transparency on me? Because people use cars to do bad things, use computers to do bad things, to do all kinds of stuff. And one of the things I worry about with law always creates precedent and builds on itself. And if the government can justify this and say, well, we need transparency because someone used this for something bad, what else can they say that for? And what do they start building? So back in 2006, they're saying, oh, these people can conceal their identities. They can conduct criminal activity to the tune of billions of dollars. And then they've been finding out that Russia, China, others come over, make US companies. And then there's bans and restrictions, for example, on foreign governments being involved in American politics. So what do? They just set up a US company, and then is it a foreign entity? So there's lots of issues where the government's trying to pass laws to stop things. And they're finding out, well, there's a lot of ways around it. And anyone that's smart can get around it. So they talk specifically about Russia, talk about Russia and Iran evading sanctions. So when Russia's at war with Ukraine, US companies aren't supposed to sell to Russia. Russia's still getting a lot of money because they can set up these networks, they can do different things. Iran's doing the same thing. Government found out that Iran they purchased 2 $25 million oil tankers somewhere in California based on their ability to use entities for that. So they go through more, and some I'm crazy concerned about. I laughed a little bit. Big examples. A Florida man using synthetic identities and shell companies distilled $24 million in COVID-19 relief money. Businesses could submit whatever they wanted. The government didn't verify any money. And and people have stolen way more than that from the government. But 24 million is what they're pointing out here.
Would Shell be considered a small business? So arguments like Chevron is buying oil tanker, does that feel a small business?
So based on the definition here, it most likely was a small business. To be a to be a large business, you have to have 20 or more full-time employees and for a year. So if you're doing that, to follow this stuff or report on these things. 75 million, but you only have 1 employee or no employees, you're not a large. That's a good question. But I look at these things and I say, are these people really money through these thresholds? Are there never any involved in this kind of stuff? I personally believe there's a lot of bigger companies that can be used by these networks that they're talking about to help facilitate things. Companies don't always know. But ultimately, the justification that they've come down to is they said, we need information on every small business owner in America because the political branches determined that the lack of beneficial ownership information jeopardized the country's foreign policy interests. So we now, because we're not disclosing everything we do as a business, we're now a national security threat. I personally have some deep heartburn over that statement. That our lack of transparency is a national security threat. Jeopardizing these foreign policy interests. I guess technically, to give them a little credibility, they don't say security, they say foreign policy. So maybe foreign policy is making a lot of money and they want to be able to make more money. I don't know exactly what their policy interest is. But usually the justification relied on in court for foreign policy is some type of national security interest, where they say we have to do this because it's national security. So that's the government's justifications for this. Their justifications don't make me personally feel very comfortable with the law and where it's at. But to give you an idea of what it takes to comply, the government wants information on every beneficial owner of a company. So the beneficial owner is any person who owns or controls 25% or more of the ownership interests of an entity, or who can exercise substantial control over the entity. So if you're an executive of a company, if you're on the board of directors, you get listed as a beneficial owner of the company. If you have options to purchase stock, more than 25%, warrants, convertible notes, those count in determining what this beneficial owner is. So the government feels that every company should have at least one beneficial owner. But some companies could have quite a few, depending on how many people have management authority over the company. And this is so that it's up to the individual companies in America to report these things to the government. And we report them to the Financial Criminal Enforcement Note. It's a federal entity that's tasked with regulating financial crimes in America. It's kind of like the FBI of financial crimes. So the government's saying if you want to own a business, if you want to be an executive in a business, you have to give us your personal information and register with us. So can you imagine if you're going to hire an employee and you say, hey, if you want to work here, you've got to go give the FBI all your information and keep it updated. Tell them wherever you're at all the time. Feels a little weird to be going, what did I do? Oh, nothing. But if you don't, it's a national security threat. Jeopardizes our foreign policy interests. So I'm curious if you think this law is going to help these financial crimes go down. I see some head shaking no. Why do you say no?
Because they're criminals, so they aren't gonna, they're gonna just break the law anyway, so making the law. Or they'll figure out a way to get around it.
Yeah, so they're criminals, so we're relying on criminals to report their identity to the government, so the government can figure out they're criminals. Just from a basic standpoint, that seems like a bad premise to start from. They're already breaking the law. They know they're breaking the law, that's why they set up these complex entities. And so then, we're relying on criminals to report. Does anyone think it will help?
They, in the sense of like, if every company has to do it, but I forgot your name, but like you were saying, like they'll just figure out a way. So
Yeah, and I already know ways around it. They have enough exceptions to it that it's not hard to get around. Yeah, and so this is a question consistently. If there's illegal things happening and people are breaking the law, and you're going to solve the problem by creating more law, how effective is that usually?
Not effective.
It's not effective unless the law is actually creating a tool that could somehow do something about it, to say we're going to hire more police, for example, to go investigate or something. But generally, if there's a law that's not being followed, Then we just say, oh, I got the answer, we'll make another law. And we'll make another law. And that's what the US and many states are doing right now, is they attempt to solve problems of legal issues, noncompliance with more laws. But they're not actually tools, or they're not creating a system that aids in that compliance. They're just saying, oh yeah, we're going to rely on people to come report. Now we'll see there are some actually pretty steep penalties associated with noncompliance. So I guess they can put people in jail for a little bit longer if they catch them.
Back here and then questions.
When I started my company, I had to register it, and my partner's name,
So did you start yours online?
yeah.
So in Utah, if you use the convenience of registering online, they'll take all your information, including your social security number.
Yeah.
But in Utah, you have the option of filing a one-page form, only putting your business name and a registered agent and nothing else. You don't have to list owner, you don't have to list a manager. You can choose the one-page form and just submit that. But if you do it online through the portal, they take all of the information. But one thing to know about that is Utah has that information. But, well, I actually probably shouldn't say this because I don't really know. I was going to say they shouldn't be sharing it. But I did just learn that when states would take your driver's license information, for decades they were selling it and making crazy amounts of money off your driver's license information. The federal government actually had to pass a law to ban states from selling your driver's license info. So states may be selling our corporate registration information. I don't know what you're doing with it.
That's why you get the online catalog every time you register a business.
Yeah, well, there's some aspects of it that are public, and you can certainly purchase the public side of it. I don't know though if they're selling their socials and other things like that associated with that, because they were with the driver's licenses.
They are.
It was pretty crazy to see what they were doing with driver's licenses.
So a suggestion from Kyle is how about if the government required only ownership of US companies, because it's big.
Yeah, and I like that suggestion that if we're really looking at foreign policy interests, we're going to look at those US citizens, right? And so any company would have to disclose that. And again, that I think is a much more tailored approach to the problem, but I still don't know if it would actually solve anything if they would voluntarily report, unless the state on its form said you have to disclose all foreign nationals or something like that. But the states don't want to do that. Many of the states don't want to do that, and they haven't yet. So this is the website you go to comply. So again, this is if you have a business and you're not exempt, you are required to go in your actual entity to file a form, a report. And so the website is fincen.gov/BOI. And when you're there on this file side right here, you can choose to do one of two things: file a report using their e-filing system or create a FinCEN ID. And we'll talk about both because there's two slightly different things happening. But it's not crazy difficult if you are the sole person in your entity, if you're there. And this is again one of the concerns I have is the government makes things easy, right? But you go to this website, click on that. If your business was created before 2024, you have until the end of this year to comply. And if your business was created in 2024, you have 90 days to comply. In 2025 and after, it's 30 days to comply with that. So the companies have to report their name, all trade names used, street address, not a PO box, and state of formation, and an EIN number. Many companies before didn't have to have an EIN. If you held real estate, for example, you didn't have to have an EIN. But to comply with this, you have to get an EIN. So then the IRS now knows you exist as well. If you're going to comply. And then you have to report, the company is required to report all its beneficial owners and their personal information. The personal info that's required is full legal name, date of birth, street address, and a scan of the driver's license or passport of every beneficial owner. Going to FinCEN. Now, if you're the individual and you're a beneficial owner, you are required by law to give this information to your company. That is going to make some people nervous. Not everyone trusts all their partners and things they do business with. And so what the government said is, oh, if you don't want to give that information to every company you're associated with, no worries. You can, let's see. One more. I'm a little off on my slides. You can register for a FinCEN ID. So you can go to the government and say, I'm a beneficial owner. I know I am. I'll give you all the info directly, so I don't have to give it to the company. And the government will issue you a FinCEN ID number that you can then give to any company, and they can report that instead of your personal information. And so they claim it's really easy to get the FinCEN ID number, and they take the same information, supposedly, that they require the businesses to submit for you. So the FinCEN ID will reduce the number of places your driver's license is if you get that. But it won't necessarily, but then either way, the government has it, whether the company reports it for you or you give it there directly. For individuals to comply, if you own 25% or more of a company or control that ownership, or you control the actual company or have managerial authority, you have to make sure that company reports that you're a beneficial owner. And so for some people, that could be quite a few companies. For others, maybe it's just one. And one thing to know, too, is that if your entity is owned by an entity, you have to go up the chain and report the individual at the end of it, however far up the chain that is, for things. And this is where compliance gets tricky for companies, is that tracking down all of the iterations of companies that may own companies that do different things can be difficult for the business itself to do at times. I just did a contract for a client, reviewed it, where the signature page showed the company signing, and then there were, I believe, 7 iterations of companies listed after that the one company was managed by this company, which was managed by this company, which was managed by this company, and it went down until there was finally an individual manager after 7 layers of companies with it. So the estimated average cost for a small business to comply in 2024 is $8,000, because of the ones that have to go down through and track down all this information. And many are going to have to probably hire attorneys to send nasty letters to people to say, you have to give us this information, because people aren't going to want to give it. And a lot of people don't know it exists. For those of you that can just say, it's just me, and go on and file, it's going to be quick and simple. But the piece you have to remember with it is, if anything changes with your situation, you have to update it within 30 days. And it's not like the driver's license division that says you have to update it within 30 days, and then you go 3 years and nothing ever happens. You have to update these, and if you don't, the penalties for non-compliance are up to 2 years in prison and up to $500 a day that reports are late or not timely corrected. It's a lot of money. Cameron?
Question for you, I don't mean to interrupt you, 2 things. One, it must be undone with visual tendency. And number 2, Preserve privacy rights, like, you know, because sometimes trusts own businesses, right?
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to show that my trust is an owner of businesses, because that's one point.
Yep. And so they're both great questions. So to go back, let's see. We will look quickly at this bottom paragraph here. This was passed in 2020 when Trump was president still. So this wasn't a Biden bill. This was under Trump. The CTA was passed 335 to 78 in the House and 86 to 14 in the Senate. It was veto proof, so no president could override it. Trump did actually veto this bill, but it still went through because so many of our Congress people voted for it. Mike Lee was the only Utah rep that voted against it. And so, to your question, can it be overturned? Anything can technically be overturned if we can create a case for it. But a president alone is not going to overturn this because of how many Congress people supported it. And then to the fact about privacy interests, privacy rights, there is a lawsuit that was filed in March of last year arguing that this is unconstitutional. And the court didn't schedule their hearing until November last year. We love the speed of law. And the court has not yet issued its ruling, which likely means they're not going to do anything because they let the law go into effect, let people start to comply. So it will go up on appeal. But one of the reasons I wanted to present on this today was also to talk about, do we assist on the appeal? Because we can get together, file briefs as amicus for the court, different things. And we have options to really push courts on a number of the constitutional issues and concerns. I believe there are quite a few. And the lawsuit does talk about quite a few. It has a couple problems. I wish I would have known about it back when they filed it, but I didn't. And not to say I could have saved everything, but just I think a lot of attorneys would have liked to know about it. But they were really they filed really early on this one. But the government put in a whole boatload of evidence, saying here's all the problems, here's all the things we're fighting, here's all the stuff we're doing. This is why it's so important. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out in court. But it will take, even if the judge comes out with his or her ruling and then it goes on appeal, it's still not going to be done by the end of this year. Most likely. So then you have to choose whether you file and comply or hope that the court strikes it down and gets rid of your penalties. Because I don't think most of us are too interested in paying $500 a day for non-compliance. So entities that have to comply include corporations, CNS corps, limited liability companies, partnerships, any entity you create by filing with the state. Exempt entities include 501c3s. Nonprofits are actually one of the major sources for moving a lot of money in America, but hey, we don't need them to comply with this. But the weird thing about 501c3s, it takes usually about a year after you file for it to get approved. You're not exempt until you're approved by the IRS. And so if you start a new 501c3 and you file your entity, you have to actually file a report, say you're complying. When you get your letter of exemption, you then update your report and say you're now exempt and pull back out. So to me, it's an interesting exemption, but any 501c3 that already exists, they don't have to report anything. Publicly traded companies don't have to report. Banks, insurance companies, securities license companies, public accounting firms. They claim these places have other regulations on them, and so they don't need this law. And then they exempt, and they don't explain why on this one, but they exempt large operating companies. And large operating companies are companies that employ 20 or more people full-time, which is at least 30 hours or more a week, have 5 million or more in gross revenue from U.S. sources, and you have to file a tax return showing that. So if you don't pay taxes, you don't qualify. And then you have a physical operating presence in the United States. So curious if you have any thoughts on why large operating companies are excluded.
Yeah, big lobbyists.
They big lobbyists. It's probably the most honest answer. Any other ideas for why they might claim that?
To me, it's like an illusion that they're doing something about money laundering.
Okay.
They're the ones money laundering. They're owning these large businesses. And they want to like get little people in trouble, get them arrested to make them think that they're actually this illusion of protection. Yeah. Anyway, I think they want people scared, so they're filing.
Okay. So you see a very negative side to what they're doing here.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Anyone have any other thoughts? Ideas? I honestly don't. I've tried to think of a justification for the large operating company exclusion. I don't know. I haven't been able to come up with one. It doesn't make sense to me. And then trusts, since they're not registered with the states, you don't have to report your actual trust. It doesn't have to file unless it owns a business, and then your trustee has to file as beneficial owner.
Even if the trust isn't registered with the state.
Yep. So if it owns a business, they're tracking that down. But if your trust runs the business and has no entity, it doesn't have to disclose anything. And so you can do a lot of business in America through just a trust. And so it's another way that you can easily circumvent this and be legal in your money laundering, which I don't know who's trying to be legal in money laundering. But you can have a trust to do a lot of that work through.
I have no idea on this, but would a large operating company feel like I already have to be pretty transparent already with all of the legal compliance we're doing?
And possibly. And
I don't know.
I don't, I try and think about, I think from the tax side, once you're over a certain amount of revenue, you have a couple more reports to file and with the IRS. But I don't know that it would do, I don't know that those reports would do anything to money laundering. Josh might have a better idea of that.
Yeah, I think you can be over.
Yeah, so Josh helps companies file taxes. Nothing's come to his mind either. And I don't know of anything either that would actually solve this problem for those companies. But they're exempt. Maybe they have the bigger lobbyists. And then trusts are still exempt too.
I have a correct. Oh, so yeah, I have a question about trust. So say you have a LLC and a trust owns the LLC. That trust, you're saying, has to report it. But what if a trust owns that trust?
Then you report each level of beneficial ownership. The beneficial ownership rules are requiring that you report the end individual that's ultimately, however many layers deep it is, who's that end person that's controlling it. And that's what they're looking for.
You said trusts don't have to report, and you can do a lot of business with trust.
Yeah.
Can you like change your company?
To a trust.
Yeah.
You can. The one potential downside is if you're a consumer facing business, you don't have the shield of liability that a LLC or corporation has. If you're a money laundering business, no one's suing you. Don't care about the shield of liability.
Right.
And so they're just providing consulting services or something. And these guys don't go to court over these things. So they're not, the liability protection they need is a nice gun and some friends, not a shield of liability that the entities have. So it's an option again. And it's one, if the government's really trying to crack down on this, why do we let people do these things that don't care about liability protection? But for those of us that do, we're just trying to be honest, good working people. And hey, I don't want a slip and fall accident to be the enemy. So we send it to an LLC or a corporation. But then the state says, oh, if you want that limited liability, come and tell us who you are. Come report. So yes, you can organize as a trust. The other one thing to know about organizing as a trust, if you file taxes, trusts are generally taxed to the highest tax rate very quickly. Whereas you can get better tax rates in entities.
If a trust though is like a faith-based organization that owns an LLC, would that exempt all of it? Say not, so like a 508c1.
Yeah, so there are certain religious organizations that are not covered by this.
Hmm.
And if you can qualify as a subsidiary of that organization, you're also exempt.
Cool.
And so you can certainly look at things like that, a 501, a 508 ministry, or other things that may qualify as tax exempt and be exempt. And then if you can have true subsidiaries of any of these exempt entities are also exempt. So yes, but it's another way to go about it. You could have a money laundering business based in your religion, set up a church. And so that is something that does happen. It's not to say that I don't believe that most religions are corrupt, but you can certainly use it for that if you wanted to.
How were they gonna like, cause I wouldn't have known about this unless by your email.
Yep.
Were they gonna send letters?
Yeah, so think about how good you feel about that, right? Federal government says, we passed it in 2020 so that people had time to learn about it. Which means you gotta hope you got an accountant or attorney that's gonna tell you, right? If you don't, what are you gonna do about it? And for millions of Americans, they're gonna start having penalties hit of up to $500 a day and have no idea. And to your question, are they sending letters out? I don't know of any plans for them sending letters out, even though they have the registered agent address of every entity in America, because that's public. One of the things I personally believe is that if the government is going to mandate that we do anything like this, they have to provide us actual notice of the law before they can fine us for non-compliance. That's my belief. I'm a fan of that type of protection in place to say, you got to make sure I actually know about it. You can't fine me for anything I don't know about. But that's not the way it's set up right now. So we talked about that. Concerns for me. This is something I've been telling people for a while. You can be a very good person and feel like you're doing everything right, but you can still be a criminal in the law's eyes. With this law in place, among other laws, you can be a criminal for simply forgetting to update your address when you move. It's an actual crime you go to jail for, prison for. I'm not okay with the government criminalizing negligent conduct, especially of good, hardworking people. I have extreme issues with that. I have extreme issues with the burden to register and be tracked in exchange for the right to work and run our business. I have high concerns for the fact there's a lot of loopholes. You can have trusts, you can have 5 owners, have no beneficial owner, and then just hire a clueless manager who doesn't know anything and just say, hey, I just pay you to sit there in the office, just sign a paper or two whenever it comes through, okay? And they're the one beneficial owner reported. They don't have any idea what's going on, and the bad guys still get away with whatever. It's not super hard, again, if you're actually trying to comply. But if you're not trying to comply, I don't know why it's going to help at all. I don't believe, from a constitutional perspective, that America should be built on the basis that we as individuals have the responsibility and burden to be part of law enforcement. I'm supposed to be able to live my life. Government's supposed to do its job. And it's supposed to be a limited government. But if the laws are of such nature that they can't even enforce them without conscripting me to be a part of it, and I say we need to look at whether this is a good law or not. Because laws should be something that can be managed by a basic police force. If it can't be, then we're probably doing it wrong. Another thing is, from a federalist perspective, from what the federal government is supposed to be involved in versus what states are supposed to be involved in, it has been a long, long history in America that states are the ones that determine rights of ownership of entities. entities or something subject to the state control. Many states have chosen, for all their own reasons, to say, yep, we don't want to disclose business ownership. And the main reason is, honestly, because so many business owners get sued and hounded by attorneys who are seeking all their assets. And most business owners are going, I want to just be able to own a piece of real estate over here and not have everyone know who owns it. And so a lot of states said, yeah, I agree. You shouldn't have to be hounded, and they just sue everything and everyone because you have money. And so they created this privacy side, this anonymous side. And now this is a pretty significant step in by the federal government to say, we're going to now start to dictate terms of business ownership. Right? Responsibilities are. From federal perspective, very dangerous, especially because at the federal level, we have a lot less control over what happens. We have a lot more control over what happens at the state level. We can go up to our legislature and yell at them here in Utah. You can't do that in the federal government. And people here in Utah can have quite a bit of influence on what happens at the state level. And anything that's really bad, we can correct or adjust. But at the federal level, it's very, very difficult to do. And then the question, well, once the feds have got us all in the system where we're giving them our address within 30 days of moving and our driver's license, the federal government is actually tasked with sharing this information with other federal agencies. So they're now going to tell the IRS every company you're a beneficial owner of. And they're supposed to share this with foreign countries the US works with. Because we're talking about foreign policy interests. So the thing to understand about that is we often don't think that's an issue, but it's becoming a huge issue because countries have signed these treaties where they agree to extradite criminals. So if you break the law of one country and they can find you in the other country, the police in the one country will pick you up and ship you to the other country to be prosecuted. And there's quite a few of these treaties in place. The US has them with the EU. And the EU, for example, has very strict privacy laws, data privacy laws. I think the minimum fine for breaking the EU data privacy laws, I want to say 20 million, maybe it was 2 million. It's in the millions of dollars, the minimum fine. The EU says if a person from the EU comes to your website and logs in or interacts with your website, you're subject to their data privacy laws. Most of us in America are not in compliance with EU data privacy laws. If the EU now knows, oh, look at this business, they've got a website, I track them back to here, and Austin's the beneficial owner, and we know exactly who's not following our data privacy laws in the EU, it starts to create issues of concern to me. I don't believe that's something our country should be doing to protect its citizens, of sharing information with other countries. But they can share your information, where you are, who you are, these types of things. And then there's not checks and balances in place on what the government can or can't do with this information. That's part of what the constitutional case is trying to do, is to say, hey, you can't use this information for law enforcement. You can't put anyone in jail based on this information. That violates the Fourth Amendment. But how that shakes out in court, we don't know. There could be some things potentially. And then again, this wasn't a Democrat-Republican fight. This was something that both parties mostly wanted and pushed through. So the way that I view law and what's appropriate is that I say law is necessary to pull us out of anarchy. Anarchy is the state of no law. And we have to have some laws in place to create a system, a workable structure to pull us out of anarchy. But if you get too many laws in place, you approach a state of tyranny where the law is telling you everything you have to do. And in order to strike this balance, I believe the Constitution was set up to strike this balance to say we need some level of law to pull us out of anarchy, but we want to leave certain things to the people or the states to have this balance where people can do things. You can be a business owner, you can run, your own thing. You can try and make it, take risk, get reward, that kind of stuff. And I believe all laws should be seeking to strike this balance where we respect the morality of people to do things. And some laws are necessary. I don't believe that we should be in a state of anarchy. But I do have high concerns over laws that don't appear to actually solve the problem, but that now criminalize good people if you don't comply. That to me starts to feel like we're moving this way towards tyranny. And so with politics currently, one of the reasons what we want to do and believe, just to share a little bit with you, is I look at our current state of society and I say, if we continue to sit around doing nothing, we'll continue to get more and more of these laws. The government will just keep doing what it's doing. It's almost a business in and of itself. And there's a number of things happening where this conflict, this divide in America is really increasing. Where people struggle even talking about political things without all kinds of feelings and just feeling gross and negative and whatever. But there's a real conflict brewing and it's growing stronger. We're losing our ability to discuss politics and search for truth. This is something I strongly believe. I don't think about it enough. I really believe COVID introduced a social anxiety to our country where we are more afraid to get together with people we don't know because we know we watched interactions with mask versus no mask, or are you vaccinated or are you not vaccinated? And I believe the social anxiety is actually deeply impacting a lot of what's taking place right now and still continues to. And then in politics, whenever anything bad happens, the businesses and the hardworking people are being blamed. And they're being saddled with more and more and more compliance to solve the problem of something bad that happened. When I go up to the Capitol here in Utah, so the session starts today in Utah, I don't see a sense of principle or purpose to any of the laws that are being passed. It's literally just someone wants it, I want it. And it's this I want it mentality as opposed to what's the proper role of law. I don't ever hear that question up there. I don't ever hear someone talk about these things. And it probably happens. I'm not there all the time. But it's mostly, I remember when Utah wanted to pass sales tax on services, the rep that was sponsoring it, he says, look, we really need all this new tax revenue. Because he says, every year I get $800 million in appropriation requests from my constituents. And I can't fulfill it. And I said, that's wonderful that you can't fulfill that. That's appropriate. You should be telling people no that just want money from the government. That's not the government's job. But to him, it was, I want it. Give me the money. I want to give it to these people. I want to do these things. The groups want the money. But we're not talking about, well, what's the purpose of law? What are the principles that dictate what's appropriate or not? And then a very concerning trend I see is the law places less and less responsibility on the consumer. It's our job as business owners to protect the consumer from all their bad decisions, from anything that might go wrong, from any harm. And it makes it very difficult for people to be in business. It's a scary thing for people to work with children or to undertake a lot of different areas. That's the most common call I get as an attorney. I don't want to get sued. I'm a good person. I'm trying to do things right. I'm not a dishonest person, and I just don't want to get sued. What can I do? And the only answer is move to another country. And because you can get sued in America, right? We all know that. So we try and put things in place to help prevent that. But the more and more the law places the burden on us to protect the consumer, the more impossible it becomes to run a small business. There's too much compliance. It's too many hoops to jump through, too many things to do. If you want to manufacture a product that can be consumed for health, it is crazy difficult to do as a small business. You need quite a bit of money. You know, I've got people that have contacted me that would make tinctures or herbal things, sell them out of their house, and the FDA shows up on their doorstep with criminal charges. It's not, to me, it's not the appropriate balance where, you know, if the law wants to say, hey, if you manufactured something in a non-FDA compliant facility, put a little sticker on it that says, I made this at home, guys. Eat it at your own risk. What more do we need than that? Someone chooses to eat it or buy it. That's on them. Why do we have to protect them from it? But what it does is it further entrenches the big business. Almost every consumer protection law that gets passed, the big businesses can comply with, but the little guys can't. And in general, there's some level of consumer protection that comes with some things. You know, we had drive safer cars now, and our water heaters blow up less than they used to. But there's so much of it taking place that it gets very difficult to be a business owner. And so I see a trend that's concerning. I'm not here pretending like it's for sure the end of the world, but I believe we have to work to change the culture and trends. So in Believe this year, we want to really push. The way I see life is that our personal life is completely tied to our business life, completely tied to our religious life, and it's completely tied to our political life. I don't believe we can separate them. And I believe strongly that things we do impacts these. And so we really want to say, let's actually talk about how everything's connected, how it goes together. Let's talk about searching for truth and good things in politics. Let's push actual solutions in society. Let's create systems of checks and balances. I think there's some really neat opportunities to do some things that actually positive impact. Let's sacrifice. Let's work together as individuals, sacrifice to build necessary solutions. And really get over the fact that we can't sit around and wait for someone else to do what we're called to do. In America, if we want our liberty, we have to work for it. If we don't, then if we don't work to protect our liberty, we're essentially asking someone else in the government to pass consumer protection laws to protect us as a consumer of politics. It's self-defeating. It will never work if we don't be involved and do things. So some of the examples, one of the things I really want to do, I believe very strongly in this, that we can actually create a model system of rules and laws. And one of the fun things about this is, for business to business transactions, you can opt as to which law applies. In a business to business transaction, you can actually opt to have a private set of rules govern your business to business transaction. It doesn't apply at all levels. You can't do it with employees. You can't opt out of things contractually with employees. But we can start creating a model system that people like more than the current laws. And business to business, you can opt into those. You can have a system of arbitration that enforces those. You can get results that are better, more efficient, where companies don't have to be afraid to be sued. If it's a business to business transaction and there's a lawsuit and it's under these rules, it can be something that doesn't tank the business. It can be something that they can go through and resolve without the attorney fees alone throwing things off for them. Almost the sole reason, the US is so proud. They say 95% of civil cases settle. They should be horrified at that. It's fine for there to be some settlements, but most legal issues are there because there's an actual dispute. A judge should hear it. The reason it settles is because it costs way too much to go to trial. And companies just say, can't keep paying legal fees, and so we'll settle because it's cheaper. That is manifestly unjust in my opinion. I'm a big fan of things. Utah has a really good constitutional provision that says you can only have one topic per bill. I think that's a really good thing. You can't add pork to legislation in Utah. Everything's supposed to be passed one topic at a time. If we did that at the federal level, spending would plummet. Because that's all that someone says, oh, you want to pass that bill? Well, here's all these things I had on. Here's $1 million for my place here, $1 billion for my place here. And these bills become 2,000 pages long, full of what they call work. And I say, why don't we talk about this? Let's actually push for that. If they want transparency, I say, let's push for transparency in government. Government's fascinating. They passed all these laws about transparency. But the place, there's no transparency still. So if you're running for office, you got to disclose a bunch about money and who donates. But once you're in office and who it is that's talking to you and who it is that even sponsored the bill, they don't even require that you list the bill, the citizen or business that sponsored the bill. So the rep's listed as a sponsor, but they don't have to say what group they're working with. They don't have to say who that is. And I go, let's actually start to look at, let's make it so we can follow the money. If you want to talk about transparency, we can talk about transparency on lawmaking. You look at our AG's office right now, our AG doesn't even want to release his calendar. And he's been ordered to. The Public Records Committee here in Utah ordered him to release it and says no. He's too concerned over that. I believe strongly that we should start having a lot of people run for office, and we should support them in that. And then one of the most important things, though, is to actively work to build smaller communities that can grow into something bigger, that are based on integrity and values that we believe should be part of government. If we're not willing to even live in a small group, according to the values that we espouse, we can't ask anyone else to follow those morals or those things at a more national level. But I believe that one of the things that happens is we can show, we can model light, we can model goodness, and that actually is what causes these power centers, these corrupt places to fall. When you look at the founding fathers, I think the miracle of what they did is that there had been established power centers for thousands of years. It was just kings and queens. That was the way of the world. And they said, we want to do something better. They created a system, a constitutional system, that once the world saw it and saw that it worked, suddenly the whole world wanted it. Constitution's been called America's greatest export. And after the American Revolutionary War, they don't teach us a lot, but there were revolutions all around the world of people saying, we're tired of the kings, we want a constitution. And now there's only a handful of countries that don't have a constitution. Almost every country's constitution is modeled on the US Constitution. They may have done some different things. But if you would have asked people in the 1600s if it was possible to overthrow the kings, they would have said, no way, it's just the way it is. And I look at that today, it can feel daunting to say, oh, what do we do about the federal government? What do we do about all these money interests and things? And I say, well, let's build something better that people want. It shines as a light, and light always wins out over darkness or evil. And so I think if we start and build it, it can grow into something amazing. I don't think it takes a lot of people even. I feel very strongly that 30 good people can do an incredible amount for this country. And these are some of the things that we would love for you guys to join us in with these. So this year, I believe these are some of the things we're working on. We'll have, right now we have 2 meetings scheduled per month. So this one's not the first Tuesday of the month because that would have been the day after New Year's. But from February through October, I think it's the first Tuesday of each month, we'll be having a professional network meeting where we try and present information that's relevant to business owners. And so we'll have legal things, we'll have business things, or we'll also have one of the things we feel strongly is that if you truly understand belief and faith, not talking from even a religious perspective, but just that principle and setting a goal, working towards it, and really break it down, it's very empowering to be able to see how to apply that in your business and your work. So we'll be talking about some of those things. And then the second meeting we have is on the second Thursday of each month. And I think there's 2 months, those fall in the same week. the first Tuesday and second Thursday following the same week, but second Thursday at 6:30 here, we have discussions particularly on constitutional issues and principles. And so far, they've been really good. You can see them. If you're nervous about joining a political discussion, those videos are online. You can look at those. And there's all kinds of fascinating information. But the more you know, the more you can work on things. So curious if there's any questions that any of you have, thoughts.
Thought from Kyle says principles are what remind us to do the right thing when the wrong thing seems like the right thing.
Yeah, and I like that. The wrong thing can seem like the right thing often. But if you go back to your principles, you can get a benchmark to say it's not the right thing.